Hello, and thank you for listening to Texas History for Kids. I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos, an educator, writer, history nerd, and novice investigator. Each week on the show, we will learn about interesting parts of Texas history, from battles and historical figures to the odd and enchanted. Hey guys, and welcome back to episode number 44, entitled Halloween Special, The Headless Horseman. Now, I apologize for not posting content these past 2 weeks, but it was my daughter's quinceañera. That means it was her 15th birthday. And if you've ever been a part of one, you know what it's like planning. It's almost like planning an entire wedding. If you want more information on quinceañeras, you can also visit episode number 39 of this podcast to hear more information about it. Anywho, so time got the best of me, but the good thing is I'm back, and since we're about to head into October, you know what that means. Halloween season is upon us. So for the next 4 episodes, you'll hear some of Texas's most haunting stories. Most hold some truth to them, but nonetheless, they are creepy and a bit scary too. So today, we're going to talk about the infamous Headless Horseman. Have you ever heard of the Headless Horseman? It's a famous story in other parts of the world, but did you know that Texas has its very own version of this spooky rider? And trust me, this one is just as chilling as the others. So let's dive into the ghostly legend that comes straight out of good old Texas history. So picture this, it's the 1800s, and the Texas frontier is wild and dangerous. There's no police force yet, and the Texas Rangers are out there chasing down bandits, protecting settlers, and keeping in order a land that is full of danger. During the 1800s, several types of bandits roamed the region, exploiting the lack of law and enforcement, ongoing conflicts, and economic instability. Texas was famous for its cattle ranches, and during the 1800s, cattle rustling, the theft of stealing cattle, livestock, or cows, was rampant. Bandits, often working in organized gangs, would steal cattle from Texas ranchers and then drive them across the border or further north to sell to other states. This was a major issue after the Civil War and during the Reconstruction era, when many Texans were struggling economically. And like I said, law enforcement didn't exist or they were really stretched thin. Cattle rustlers could be Anglo outlaws, Mexicans, or even Native American groups. Some of these outlaws were former cowboys or even ranch hands who turned to crime after losing work or facing hard times. The lawlessness of Texas during much of the 19th century attracted all types of criminals, including violent outlaws who robbed banks, stagecoaches, and even trains. Now, these desperados often traveled in gangs and operated in Texas due to the weak legal system and open spaces that made it easy for them to hide. Many of the outlaws in South Texas were Mexican bandits, sometimes referred to as raiders. These bandits would cross the Rio Grande River to attack Texas settlement ranches and stagecoaches. They would steal cattle, horses, money, and any other valuable goods they could find. Then they'd return across the border to avoid capture. This activity was common during the Mexican-American War. By 1846, America was fighting with the Mexicans, who refused to leave their land. The Rio Grande River was supposed to be the official border between the United States and Mexico, but Mexico didn't agree and believed the border was actually the Nueces River. This disagreement created a big area of land between the two rivers. Since no one could agree who owned it, it became known as No Man's Land. Outlaws loved this spot because there were hardly any rules, making it a perfect place for them to hide and cause trouble. There were many dangerous men running around in those days. Now, some of the famous Mexican bandits included Juan Cortina, a notorious Mexican folk hero and bandit leader who led raids against the white settlers in South Texas. He later on became a symbol of resistance to what many Mexicans saw as the illegal takeover of their land after the Texas Revolution and the Mexican-American War. Another famous bandit was Pancho Villa, who is more well known for his role in the Mexican Revolution during the 1910 through 1920s. Now, neither of these men were the culprit of today's story. They very well could have been. The Texas Rangers had a job to do, and that job was to get rid of all Mexican bandits who were stealing cattle from Texas ranches. Now, according to legend, this bandit, only known as Vidal, had a bounty over his head. He was wanted, dead or alive. Now, in those days, those words really rang true. The authorities didn't care how a person was given justice. Much different than today's standards. Mr. Vidal was on a raid one summer night. He decided to raid a settlement that he knew most of the men were off fighting the Comanche warriors, and he knew those men had left it unprotected. It was during this raid where Vidal made a huge mistake. Some of the horses that he stole actually belonged to one of the Texas Rangers who was on the hunt for him, named Creed Taylor, and boy was he angry. So Creed teamed up with fellow Texas Ranger Bigfoot Wallace and another rancher only named Flores to catch Vidal. When they discovered Vidal and his men, they waited for him all night long to fall asleep, and then they launched their attack. Now, as I said before, the Texas Rangers were known to be ruthless. Creed Taylor and William Anderson, Bigfoot Wallace, didn't just arrest Vidal. The Rangers decided to take the law into their own hands, and in a pretty gruesome way, y'all. They wanted to make an example out of him. They wanted other raiders to understand that if you raided Texas property, they were going to do the same to you. So they decapitated Vidal. That means they cut off his head, and they tied his body on the back of a fast horse known as a Mustang. Bigfoot attached his head with a sombrero or a big hat to the saddle, and then they sent the horse off to run wild and wander around Texas. I now have an image in my head of this horse roaming around the hills of Texas with a dead man's body strapped to him. That image is pretty harsh. Soon, stories started spreading about this headless rider. He was often spotted in remote areas where not many people were. Cowboys claimed they saw him riding a dark horse, his head still with the sombrero on it, swinging back and forth as the horse galloped forward. As more cowboys saw the spooky figure, they tried to stop him by firing bullets at him. But no matter what they did, the horse and his headless rider kept on going. This is how the legend of El Muerto, the Headless One, began. Now, finally, a group of local ranchers caught the wild horse at a watering hole near the small town of Ben Bolt, Texas. Still tied tightly to the horse's back was the dried up body of Vidal, covered in bullet holes and Indian arrows. The bandit's head was never found. The ranchers buried the headless body in an unmarked grave near Ben Bolt, and the poor horse was finally free from its haunting headless passenger. On dark, quiet nights, travelers start seeing a ghostly figure riding a black horse with glowing red eyes. This mysterious rider wasn't just any cowboy. He was headless. Yes, people see this headless, ghostly figure, and legend says he's still searching for it. Or maybe he's searching for revenge. People describe him as wearing dark clothes, carrying a sword, galloping through the Texas desert at a high speed. The sound of hoofbeats thunder across the land, and if you're unlucky enough to cross his path, you might feel a little cold wind or hear the haunting sound of him chasing you down. Do you think you could outrun a headless ghost? Some say the only way to escape is to ride away fast and never look back. The horseman disappears after you flee, but the fear stays long with you so long after. So what's interesting is that there are a few different versions of this story told all throughout Texas, and in one version, the Headless Horseman wasn't even a bandit at all. Some say he was a Texas Ranger who lost his head in a fight with outlaws. Now, it is said he haunts the plains looking for revenge on the criminals who wronged him. Others believe the horseman might have been a Confederate soldier who lost his head during a battle in the Civil War. And still, there's another story that places the horseman near Devil's River in southwest Texas, where a ranch hand was wrongly executed by his boss, and now his ghost rides through the foggy night seeking justice. Legends like the Headless Horseman stick around because they connect our history, our fears, and our imaginations. Texas was once a lawless and dangerous place, you guys, full of real-life drama and real conflict, and ghost stories have helped explain, really, the unexplainable. Plus, who doesn't love a good spooky story, right? People still claim to see the Headless Horseman in lonely Texas deserts, and whether or not you believe in ghosts, his tale still lives on. And who knows, maybe the next time you're driving through Texas alone and at night, you might catch a glimpse of him too. Until next time, my friends, stay curious, stay safe, and always keep your eyes open. You never know what you might see. Do you have any questions or true-to-life stories that you want me to talk about? Send me an email, michellegallegos.author@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, yesterday is today's history. Hello, all you history buffs out there. I'm Michelle Gallegos, a former educator turned podcaster. Are you passionate about learning stories of Texas history that you don't exactly get to learn in school? Sure, you've heard about native tribes, a few famous battles, and historical figures like Stephen F. Austin. All topics that every Texas student should learn about. But what if I could offer you even more? Imagine not only listening to this podcast, but also having access to reading materials that accompany each episode, making it easier to dive into the topics that interest you most. I think you'll love what I have to offer. Alongside each podcast episode, I've created detailed digital reading resources and comprehension activities designed to deepen your understanding and enhance your knowledge. These materials are perfect for students who are eager to explore topics further, and for teachers looking for ready-to-use activities in the classroom for resources. You'll find true, factual stories about Texas history, complete with suggested activity questions that bring classroom discussions to life. Dive deeper into our episodes by visiting michellegallegos.author.com and get access to engaging material, fun activities, and captivating historical stories.